A viral satellite photo screamed massacre in Sudan, but the real horror was unfolding 300 kilometers away. On the 3rd of November 2025, an anonymous post on a popular platform claimed to show a vast stain of blood and the bodies of hundreds strewn across the Sudanese landscape. It raced across the world, demanding outrage and action. Yet the image did not show a massacre. It showed a watering hole, ringed by cattle, captured by satellites in March 2024, and visible in the same place even in 2022 before the civil war began. The post was false. The tragedy it obscured was not. As attention fixated on a hoax, a real city bled. El Fasher, the capital of North Darfur, had been under siege since April 2023. The Rapid Support Forces, known as the RSF, encircled a population of about 260,000 souls, half of them children, and strangled the city for 18 relentless months. Artillery and drones rained down. Food and aid were denied. No one was allowed out. UNICEF called it a siege out of the medieval era. The world knew the danger. The world did not act. In August 2025, the RSF built a raised sand barrier, a massive berm that tightened the noose even more. By early October, El Fasher and its people were contained within 7 square miles, cut off and surrounded. Warnings grew louder. Analysts and humanitarians pleaded that if the city fell, a massacre would follow. The RSF had shown its nature before. They had taken El Geneina in mid-2023. There, as many as 15,000 people were killed in house-to-house executions. In April 2025, they overran the largest refugee camp in Sudan, killing more than 1,500 and driving 400,000 from their homes. Their public rhetoric described entire communities as valid targets. The pattern was plain. The consequences were foreseeable. On the 26th of October, 2025, the last defenses inside El Fasher collapsed. The RSF flooded past the Berm and seized the city. What followed, according to mounting evidence, was an ethnically targeted campaign of door-to-door executions. Satellite images captured burned vehicles near the encircling Berm. Or the courtyard of a former children's hospital, a sequence of images told a story too terrible to look away from. On the day the city fell, the courtyard lay bare. 4 days later, it was filled with white shapes the length of a human body, and the soil outside was freshly disturbed. 3 days later, the excavation had widened. By the following day, the ground was covered with fresh earth. Communications were cut shortly after the fall. Even so, evidence continued to surface. Analysts who had tracked the siege began to warn that the scale of death may be unlike anything seen in the 21st century. The executive director of Yale's Humanitarian Research Lab, Nathaniel Raymond, suggested that more people may have been killed in 1 week in El Fasher after the takeover than in 2 years of war in Gaza. Gaza's health ministry reported at least 69,000 dead over that period. If that comparison holds, the scale evokes the opening days of Rwanda in 1994. The world barely noticed. To understand how a city could be brought to this brink, one must understand Darfur. The region lies at the crossroads of the Arab and sub-Saharan worlds, where identities have long been fluid, shaped by language and livelihood more than by visible difference. Arabic-speaking nomads in the north historically moved their herds along negotiated routes through lands tended by non-Arabic-speaking farming communities in the south. For generations, the system worked. Then, the climate shifted. In the 1980s, catastrophic drought and famine swept Darfur. Rains failed in 1983 and 84. Land that had sustained farmers and herders shrank. Communities competed for water and fields. The social contract frayed. At the same time, politics from the capital concentrated power and resources near the Nile and neglected the peripheries. Identities hardened. Conflict spilled across borders with Chad and Libya, where fighters and weapons moved freely. In Libya, Muammar Gaddafi pursued an Arab belt across the Sahel. He armed a paramilitary force called the Islamic Legion and drew in recruits from northern Darfur. When the Legion dissolved, veterans brought weapons and a supremacist ideology back into Darfur. They organized as the Arab Gathering. Non-Arabic-speaking communities formed self-defense groups. What had been a local competition over land began to turn into an ethno-political confrontation. By 2003, as Sudan ended a long war between North and South, two rebel movements in Darfur rose to demand autonomy and a fair share of power and resources. The government in Khartoum armed local Arab militias to fight them. Those militias became known as the Janjaweed. Villages were burned. Tens of thousands were massacred. Hundreds of thousands more died from famine and disease. The United States declared it genocide in 2004. A United Nations inquiry documented vast war crimes and urged action. The Security Council demanded the disarmament of the militias. The world argued over words even as Darfur bled. Justice did not come. In 2013, Sudan's ruler elevated the Janjaweed into a formal parallel force. They became the Rapid Support Forces. The International Criminal Court issued warrants for the president but could not arrest him. In October 2025, one former commander surrendered himself and was convicted of war crimes and crimes against humanity. He remains the only person tried over the atrocities of that era. In 2019, the ruler was overthrown. A power-sharing deal placed the Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan at the top, and the RSF commander Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, known as Hemeti, as his deputy. 4 years later, they turned their guns on each other. The civil war that began in April 2023 unleashed the worst humanitarian crisis on Earth. The United Nations reported famine across Sudan in 2024. 25 million people faced extreme hunger. 12 million fled their homes. By August 2025, before Fasher fell, the former United States Special Envoy to Sudan estimated more than 400,000 people had been killed. Throughout this war, the RSF continued a campaign of terror in Darfur against non-Arabic-speaking communities. The siege of Fasher trapped more than 200,000 civilians and set the stage for a massacre that many had warned was imminent. International action amounted to calls for ceasefire resolutions without enforcement. In early 2025, the United States determined that the RSF was committing genocide in Darfur, a finding that the next administration continued. Sanctions followed. They did not change the outcome in Fasher. The RSF did not act alone. Their war machine was fueled by money, weapons, and political cover. Much of that support came from the United Arab Emirates. The UAE is a major buyer of arms from the United States and Europe. In 2020, it signed a $23 billion deal for modern fighters, drones, and munitions. It buys from France, Britain, Russia, and China. Reporting by the Wall Street Journal described cargo planes landing in Chad with weapons disguised as humanitarian deliveries. As the RSF stumbled in early 2025, evidence assessed by the United States Defense Intelligence Agency and the State Department's Intelligence Bureau indicated that deliveries increased. Arms flowed through Chad, Somalia, and Libya. On battlefields, caches included modern Javelin missiles, 155mm shells, and rifles like the M4 and the AR-15. RSF units fielded Chinese-made CH-95 drones and vehicles with British engines. The pattern pointed to a pipeline with a single enabling hub. Why would the UAE take this risk? The answer lies in ports on the Red Sea, in agricultural land, and above all, in gold. Sudan is rich in gold, and Darfur holds much of it. Since the war began, a clandestine arrangement has taken shape. Weapons flow in. Gold flows out. Gold is smuggled from mines under RSF control across borders into neighboring states, then airlifted to Dubai. In 2024, the UAE became Sudan's top export destination, with 91% of Sudan's exports to the UAE being gold. More than half of Sudan's total exports were gold. Dubai has become a global hub for gold trading. In 2022, the UAE imported about $59.5 billion worth of gold, with more than half of that total coming from Africa. According to data released in 2024, nearly 7% of the UAE economy that year was tied to imported African gold. A significant share of that originated in Darfur. The weapons that buy that gold help power atrocities. Cutting that power requires confronting a partner. The UAE hosts a major United States airbase at Darfur. It is a core player in the Abraham Accords and a major investor in American industries. It pledged more than $1 trillion in investment over a decade. Suspending arms deals, sanctioning entities, and freezing assets would carry costs. Yet words without leverage will not stop a killing machine. The path forward is brutally clear. Sever the supply chain that enables the RSF to kill. Use sustained diplomatic pressure, targeted sanctions, and the suspension of arms transfers to force a change in calculus. Without the flow of weapons and money, the RSF would be diminished. Without that action, the pattern of siege and slaughter is likely to spread across Darfur. Analysts warn that further balkanization of Sudan may follow, with the RSF entrenched in Darfur and the regular army elsewhere, leaving minorities trapped between power centers and vulnerable to the next wave of violence. The false image that captivated millions showed a watering hole. True images, less seen and more carefully studied, show burned vehicles, freshly disturbed earth, and a city choked by a man-made desert wall. The lesson is as stark as the satellite's eye. In an age of viral deception, facts are still there to be found. In Darfur, they reveal a catastrophe. In Fasher, they reveal a week that may stand among the darkest of this century. And in the network of money and arms beyond Sudan's borders, they reveal a lever that can still be pulled. Awareness must become pressure. Pressure must become action. Lives depend on it.